Hello, welcome to How to Ramp Up Your E-Commerce Strategy. Kelsey Grewis and I'm Carrie Rhodes will be presenting today. We'll get into introductions in just a few minutes here. Before we dive in, I just wanted to remind everyone this is a live webinar today. So we'll have the opportunity to answer questions at the end, but if you have a question that is burning and relevant to what we're talking about, we will do our best to get to that during that point in the discussion. And then if not, like I said, we're shooting to have about 10 to 15 minutes at the end to go through Q&A. So keep them coming through as we go, or we can address them at the end. So with that being said, just jumping into introductions, Kelsey, you want to, that's perfect. So like I said, I'm Carrie Rhodes. I'm the Director of Marketing, and I've been with the company for a little over 7 years now. So just given that, and given 7 years ago, we were definitely operating as a startup still. I've worn a lot of different hats within the company, which has been really, really rewarding and fun, and I've gotten to know a lot of different kind of pieces of the company. Currently, being the marketing director, oversee our digital marketing team. So that's really focused on the B2C efforts that we have to help brands really drive awareness for their brands, as well as direct marketing conversions for their brands, specifically, or I should say predominantly on marketplaces like Amazon, Google, Walmart, etc. So we help brands with their paid marketing strategy, their SEO, as well as their inbound marketing. So kind of top of the funnel, driving brand awareness and consumers to their listings on marketplaces from off marketplace, as well as the B2B efforts to grow e-tailz brand awareness through our inbound efforts. And then the other team is really our creative marketing team. So obviously they support e-tailz and our branding and our website and everything like that. But we also work with brands on their B2C strategy, B2B, and helping them with any photography needs that they have, for instance, for new product launches, or if sometimes we work with brands and they don't really have a ton of insight about what the marketplace consumer is looking for, and so we can work with them in making sure that the photography that they're showing out there in the world within the marketplace landscape is aligning with what consumers are wanting or are wanting to see, that ultimately drive and maximize conversions, as well as things like videography to really try to drive up conversions within that listing. And we've done everything from packaging design to website, so kind of everything under the sun from the creative side of the house. So then I'll let Kelsey just step in here and do a quick intro for herself as well.
Yeah, you do it all, Carrie, all of it. Like Carrie mentioned, my name is Kelsey Grewis. So similar to Carrie, held quite a few different hats within e-tailz. Been here for just about 5.5 years at this point. So I worked on our business development team. I did some work on our international side of the business.
Kelsey, I think you cut out. Just bear with us. We'll make sure.
Brands have on Amazon marketplaces, as well as brand control and some other fee recuperation as well. And then there's the agency side of the house, which is really partnering with brands as an extension of their brand to implement our years of strategy, our technology on their behalf. So really helping brands take back control, take back margin gains, all of which is under the subscription side of the business. So that's where I'm at now. Really excited to be working through this webinar with Carrie. And, like Carrie mentioned, I think we have a lot of good insights here to get some conversation started. So I will go ahead and move into the next slide here, which is just a quick agenda. We'll start with Carrie reviewing the state of e-commerce. So this is going to look at world and national trends for e-commerce in general, but specifically as we look at some of the changes and effects that COVID-19 has had, not only on brands, but on the customers shopping for brands as well. Based on that information, we'll talk high level about both crafting your marketplace strategy and key considerations. So looking at the importance of having a pretty designated and consistent strategy for e-commerce marketplaces, and then some things that you should be aware of, not necessarily deterrents, but just, hey, some FYIs. These are things that are important and imperative to the success of your brand ongoing. And then, like Carrie mentioned, we'll have some designated time for Q&A at the end. You guys have the ability to drop in questions at any time. So please feel free to do that. Carrie and I can stop and answer those as they're relevant to what we're currently talking about, but in any case, we'll make sure they're all answered at the end in that Q&A portion. So Carrie, if you want to go ahead and jump in to the state of e-commerce.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for setting the stage. Yeah, so just before we really get into the meat of this, we wanted to really address what's been occurring over the last few months, which most of the attendees are probably well aware. If you want to jump to the next slide, Kels. Of the pandemic and all of the impacts and implications that that's had on the economy globally, domestically, really every single business in some way or other has been impacted. But specifically when looking at e-commerce, that's really where we're seeing, for obviously relevant to our space, a huge, significant impact being had. And while analysts had predicted that this year would be a growth year within e-commerce, they had not predicted it to be 18% this year, which is the highest we've seen since this metric has been first recorded in 2008. So, and when you're looking at this chart over here, I mean, it's significant retail e-commerce sales and dollars that we're talking. So to see 18% year on year is very, very significant. In addition, e-commerce share of total retail will reach about 14.5% of total retail sales in 2020. So that is also an all-time high and the biggest share increase in one single year. So what this means for us and for brands alike is so much opportunity, but it's kind of goes without saying that there's a lot of considerations and different factors that can influence and impact the brands. The brands that are pivoting to e-commerce are really trying to maximize what they're currently doing on e-commerce ability to drive success in a sustainable way. So jumping into the next slide, just diving a little bit deeper here. If you want to flip over, Cal, there we go. So looking at the top categories where we're seeing this growth, really it's within food and beverage, personal care, health and beauty. It's I should say, step back. It's really across the board, but those are the top categories where we're seeing the biggest kind of momentum being had. And the obvious driver is the pandemic's massive shock, demand shock, store closures, and stay-at-home orders. So while consumers have been forced to stay at home, brick and mortars are not open, there's a natural evolution for brands to migrate their shopping behaviors to e-commerce, where a lot of shoppers were already going to begin with, especially over the last decade, but specifically within the last few years. But we're just seeing this really amplified given the state of everything and kind of the world being put on pause in a lot of ways. And then globally, what's interesting is that the global sales will actually decelerate to about almost 17% in 2020, down from about 20% last year, which could be surprising in just looking at it, but there's two massive markets that are really driving that, and that's India and China. And then on the positive side, what's kind of countering that for the growth is the growth rate increases that we're seeing here in North America. Asia Pacific has seen significant growth, as well as the European market. So jumping into the next slide. So I think also what's really interesting is just the obvious impacts and kind of forces that we've. Oh, go ahead.
Carrie, really quickly, I just was going to say, it sounds like your mic's cutting in and out a little bit. I don't know if there's something you can do to correct that. We just got some notes here in the questions.
Oh, sorry about that.
That sounds better. That sounds much better.
It does? Okay, sorry about that. Never-ending tech issues that we're always working through, so bear with us. Sorry about that. So yeah, I think it's important to call out to some of the impacts that we've seen on big retailers that many people have been shopping at for decades. But in total, last year, we saw 17 large retailers file for bankruptcy. This year, we're still pretty early in July. We've already seen 15. So this is really indicative of the fact that brands that had to close many of their brick and mortar stores, where for a lot of them, that was where they saw the majority of their traffic and sales coming from, they weren't able to successfully manage through this difficult time. And so as a result of that, brands that we've been working with or new brands that we've been talking to have had to quickly pivot to marketplace where there's already an existing consumer demand. More and more consumers are shifting to marketplace because of the established kind of setting that they have and the incentives that they're able to offer consumers. But also because a lot of these retailers who previously were able to place consistently large POs for those brands, likely are pulling back. And not only because they're filing for bankruptcy, but also because they likely have inventory on hand that they weren't able to move through over the last few months. So it's had a very strong ripple effect, forcing brands to have to pivot and really have to embrace more of what they're doing within e-commerce, but specifically within pivoting to marketplaces where there's already an existing consumer demand and presence readily available to for brand awareness and for driving up their profitability and making sure that the brands themselves are also managing through this uncertain time.
I think this is interesting too, because you look at these retailers here and they're pretty specific to, well, majority, I should say, are specific to like the clothing apparel line, which is, one thing. But the other thing is that just how this will shape customer habits as well. So not necessarily just looking at this and being like, oh, shoot, these specific stores are out. Where are these products going to go? But just the mass number of retailers and brick and mortars that are filing for bankruptcy or choosing to be closed for a longer period of time, and what this means for customer habits. If I'm getting used to shopping online now, how this trend will continue. So just kind of a call out.
Yeah, that is a good call out. I think especially for apparel, I know me personally, I'm definitely more, a little bit more timid on buying anything online, but especially from marketplace where maybe I don't have as much confidence in the apparel selection. This is really driving that. And I think we'll see a huge uptick in categories where maybe there was a little bit more general timidness for consumer behavior, and it's forcing that adoption at a much faster velocity.
Right. Great.
All right. And then, as I mentioned, looking at earlier this year in Q1 2020, e-commerce accounted for about 12% of U.S. retail sales. Since then, we've seen that increase, but that was up over 11% in Q4 2019, which is still significant growth as a total percentage of retail sales. And then additionally, kind of within that, 64% of e-commerce customer journeys customers begin their shopping journey on marketplaces. So whereas before they know to go to Google predominantly or elsewhere online, more and more of them are starting their initial product research. So really using marketplaces as a search engine for product research to kind of harness that discoverability. So very interesting, and we're really seeing that be a huge opportunity for brands that are really effectively managing and strategizing for all of their marketing campaigns and promotions, and really how they're diversifying their product catalogs, which Kelsey and I will touch on later in this webinar. And then the next slide, for brands that are shifting to marketplaces. So this is really a result of Amazon. So 64%, like I mentioned, of customers are pivoting over to marketplaces to start their initial product research and kind of doing those initial search queries. But Amazon alone is capturing nearly half of the U.S. e-commerce sales. So I think most people are very well aware of the size and kind of the 800-pound gorilla effect that Amazon has. But to take a step back and to look at the fact that they're capturing half of U.S. e-commerce sales is very, very significant, and they're not slowing down anytime soon. They have an established customer base, and for brands pivoting over, as opposed to trying to, gain more customers through their direct websites or through other retailers, it's a lot of times much more cost effective for them to acquire them on marketplaces. And while there may be, a little bit less customer loyalty directly to that brand, just given the sheer catalog size that Amazon and other marketplaces are able to provide, they're not having to invest nearly as much in driving that consumer to their website or to a different retailer's website to make that final purchase. They're capitalizing on where the consumers already are. So it's kind of a natural evolution of how consumers have shifted their buying behaviors, but also how marketplaces have continued to grow and offer incentives that align with where consumers are wanting to shop and the types of perks that they're looking for. So thinking about Amazon Prime, I know I personally have a very hard time shopping on e-commerce from a retailer who can't get me a product within 2 days or at least 3 days. If I have to wait a week, that's painful for me. And that's kind of how we're being conditioned as consumers, is expecting those perks that these marketplaces can and have done very effectively over the last several years, specifically Amazon. Their growth is also extremely significant. So in Q1, they posted in their earnings $75.5 billion in revenue with 28% year-on-year growth. So I think the growth percentage is even more interesting to me just because of the sheer volume that we're seeing and how that's compounding year-on-year. This year, given everything we just talked about, it'll be continued growth, but likely at a much higher rate. So just continuing to see that that trend continue in the opportunities that it's presenting to brands and consumers alike. And as a result of that, we're really seeing a lot of additional opportunities and shifts from various marketplaces, Walmart being one of them. And we really see Walmart being a huge contender to kind of give Amazon a run for their money and what they're able to provide. More recently, Walmart has offered Walmart Fulfillment Services, which is kind of their way of rivaling FBA, Amazon's fulfillment services, which brands and retailers send product to Amazon, and then they're able to offer the Prime badge for consumers. So Walmart has been kind of testing with that and experimenting with that, working to perfect that to really, like I said, rival Amazon. And then more recently, they announced that, or there's been rumors, I should say at this point, that they're going to be releasing Walmart Plus, which is a direct rival of Amazon Prime. Still a lot to be learned about it, and a lot more to come from Walmart directly, and it's still untested and unproven. But we're very excited, just given that it could steal consumer market share and provide a lot more additional, I think, a reach for brands that are looking for a different consumer base because of the nature of Walmart and the customers that they've acquired over the last several years. Walmart, or in addition, Amazon is also really investing a lot more in what they've been doing to support and kind of respond to the pandemic. They've been pretty vocal about how they've invested in a lot of their resources and staff. They recently announced that they hired 175,000 additional full and part-time employees in 2020 to be able to support this additional demand. So as we're seeing this demand spike early in the year, and then especially as we go into Q4, where they've also rumored to have moved Prime Day to October, they're obviously gearing up for that and anticipating this demand to continue. So hopefully we won't see as many out of stock issues and things like that. We know that they are starting to kind of plan for that and how they're going to still be able to respond to all this demand, knowing that by Q4 the demand will only continue to increase. So while they're hiring additional staff, there are some concerns which we'll touch on to be aware of as we're going into Q4 in terms of planning ahead for Q4, making sure that your inventory is received in time, so that we're not in a situation where we're being very reactive to kind of the demand that's existing there. And then last thing I was going to touch on real quick is that Google has also responded in a way that they're really pushing brands that have pulled back or been forced to pull back their ad dollars, just given trying to manage through this uncertain time. $1,000 in ad credits to small and medium-sized businesses during COVID-19. So kind of their way of continuing to gain momentum as they're seeing more brands, shift to their marketplace, but advertisers at the same time pull back their ad spend because of financial constraints or just trying to be conservative through this time without knowing kind of how long it's going to last and the long-term implications that it's going to have. The next part I really wanted to kind of dive more specifically into Walmart Plus, because as I mentioned, this is something we're really excited about and I think has a huge upside for brands and consumers alike. There are some parallels to Prime. Like I said, it's kind of Walmart's way of rivaling Prime directly. So the free 2-day shipping, early access to deals, express delivery for groceries and select goods, those are kind of the overlapping pieces. But then looking specifically at what Walmart is able to provide, just given, like I said, the customer base that they've established really over their tenure, and kind of the advantages that they have in their massive brick and mortars. They're able to offer fuel discounts at gas stations, scan and go service in store. So bringing consumers in store as well as offering these benefits online, which is something that Amazon obviously doesn't have. Apparently, and this is kind of still up in the air at this point because it's yet to come directly from Walmart, at least all the specifics, but $98 a year as opposed to $119 a year for Prime. So very similar pricing, obviously more competitive than Amazon. And then eventually there's talks about a Walmart Plus credit card, Walmart Plus entertainment package. So you can see all of the different ways that they can take this that provide a ton of incentive for consumers that may have been very loyal Prime consumers, but at a less expensive rate, and all of these additional perks that they'd be getting in store may be more compelling or may reach different consumers who aren't Prime subscribers already.
Yeah, I think the last time we saw something like this, correct me if I'm wrong, Carrie, but was really when Jet kind of first came out. And obviously Jet and Walmart are one now, but at the time, the subscription business here for an e-com site really was just Prime. Jet came out, that didn't work very well. But the difference here is that Walmart is so incredibly established, both in a brick and mortar presence and really online, even though it kind of still looks like peanuts to Amazon. That's just because Amazon is so massive, but still does a significant amount of business on e-commerce. So I think early adopters here will see some benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point.
Awesome, thanks, Carrie. So again, that information I think is one that we as a brand, as consumers, have really been aware of with the shift of COVID. But as we'll jump into here, utilizing that data and kind of understanding what does this mean for your marketplace strategy? What are some thoughts that you should be thinking of as you look to pivot or adjust or add to your existing strategy going forward? So the first page here, just creating an e-commerce image. And I think that's a little bit broad, sounds a little bit cheesy, but the reality is, and you've seen this stat before, 64% of shopping occasions are starting online. So first impressions are huge. I think that's a given. But the other thing here in the data, what it just showed us is that there are going to be new audiences that are continuing to come to e-commerce. So anticipating here that 64% number will continue to rise, which means that your goal here should be not only maintaining, but continuing to gain market share in whatever category your products are, especially as not only additional shoppers come, but additional brands look to start to establish themselves online as well. Cross-marketplace consistency here. So last year, Feedvisor showed that customers are not only, starting their shopping online, but they're also shopping around online before they purchase. So they're starting on e-commerce, but they're taking the time to review different marketplaces. And it showed us too that what they're comparing mostly are both price and then reviews of products or brands. So, this speaks to the importance of consistency across marketplaces, instilling brand confidence and brand trust in your consumers by making sure all of your e-commerce sites are housing the same information. And granted, there will be promotionary periods for a specific website or e-com platform over another that should absolutely be taken advantage of. But I think about, pricing specifically and how that can impact or affect a customer's buying habits. Not only how it's priced competitively in the marketplace and consistently, but you also think about branding and imaging and kind of the underlying fear of counterfeit or fake product that is on marketplaces, just because from a consumer perspective, there is still a lot of anonymity around where these products are coming from. We know the brands, we know the products, but we aren't necessarily conditioned to know or to look for who is providing these products to us. So I think, things like adjustments in price or difference in branding and imaging are kind of quick red flags to consumers. Like, is this true? Is this real? It's different than what I've known and what I've seen, even what I've known and what I've seen when I'm talking about the products I've seen in brick and mortar, for example. So cross-marketplace consistency, while there will be some variances, I think really important to keep in mind what this means for your recurring customers and for brand new customers who start their search online but are also shopping around. And then marketplace efficiency here. So I think this is one that if you're established on e-commerce, you probably have a good handle on, but if this is a newer transition for you, is important to understand. And I think about it specifically from a cost or lost revenue perspective on a brand side of things. So understanding, does your packaging or should your packaging be changed at all to accommodate e-commerce? From a brick and mortar standpoint, it's pretty simple, right? You send products to a brick and mortar, they house them, we have some sort of different display options. That's not the case with e-commerce, and you're paying a lot. You're paying for fulfillment, not only to send the product to whatever warehouse you're storing, whether it be Amazon or Walmart, but you're also paying to store the products there and then ship it to the end customer, and you're paying to do it in 2 days, right, for Prime. So making sure that you are changing your packaging where it's necessary to make sure that you are reducing any fulfillment costs where you can. But then also on the back side of it would be for categories where it makes sense, reducing any breakage risk here. So if you have large or sensitive products, if might be smart to look at how you're packaging products. And Amazon specifically, we know, has specific guidelines on how you need to package some of these more fragile products, but even still, reducing the risk of breakage once it gets to the customer or in transit can reduce your return rates as well. Moving here into aligning marketing strategies with brand growth goals. And I think first it's important to know that your strategy and your growth goals may be different for each marketplace, or it may change over the months, especially as we see how these trends change and how they continue to impact us. So I think that's the first thing, but really looking at a cohesive and layered approach to your marketing strategy that can span across multiple e-commerce platforms. So there's obviously going to be marketing opportunities per platform. We'll talk about some of them, right? There's Amazon, there's Walmart, Google Shopping that Carrie just mentioned. So there's that availability, but also I think thinking about like inbound efforts. So with last year, Feedvisor said that 74% of customers head to marketplaces like Amazon to look for specific brands, which means they're heading to these marketplaces knowing a product or knowing a brand that they have in mind. So with the closures of brick and mortar, but also just people getting out less right now and having less face-to-face conversation, learning about products, as well as the advertising that they're exposed to, it's going to be important for you to potentially adopt more aggressive marketing strategies. Social media ads, for example, or using influencers, we know that you can get in front of multiple thousands, even hundreds of thousands of sometimes different customers. So a lot of impressions to be made there. And one thing too, I think it's maybe a little bit dated, but I think still really applicable, is the rule of 7, right? Which is you have to know that you are one of multiple thousands vying for your customers' attention at this point. So the idea that you need to get your brand or your product or your ad in front of them multiple times, in this case 7 times, for them to really resonate with what they're seeing. And that is still very much true. It can be really expensive if you're not doing it that way specifically. So again, heightened need to both attract and retain customers on e-commerce sites. We talked about how brands are, how customers are starting their search online, but we also talked about how the large majority are going for brands that they already know. So a strategy shift in how you're marketing and where you're trying to market is going to be imperative. You're going to have to spend a little bit of money here to get out in front of new customers, to work on understanding the different customer bases that you have and how you can be able to reach them. Flows nicely here into the ability to obtain and make strategic decisions based on data. So each individual place where you're marketing, whether it's Amazon, it's Walmart, or you're utilizing social media ads, all of those give you some level of access to data, some more than others, but imperative that you have the ability to not only get that, but then spend time understanding how you can utilize that information for good here. So, when curated correctly, Amazon gives you the ability to look at your marketing efforts on a SKU level, which allows you to make specific and tailored edits to your campaigns that don't have to impact the larger subset of your campaigns if it doesn't make sense. But by having those insights, you know the best move there. You can take this data, you can replicate converting keywords or phrases, for example, incorporate it into your SEO on not only marketplaces, but on your own website. Really, you can use this across different marketplaces here. And Amazon specifically has come out with quite a few different ways to link the two. And when I say the two, I mean Amazon specific marketing and some inbound efforts you may have. For example, if you're brand registered and you have a brand store, there's a lot of different insights you can get from incoming traffic that is coming from off Amazon to Amazon. So you can link specific social ads or influencers that you're utilizing to really see the return there, which our thought is that they'll continue to expand on this ability, but that's huge for brands because previously there hasn't been a lot of insights into how inbound marketing is performing, and that's just not the case anymore. And because of that, it's really imperative, I think, that brands adopt this strategy. The last thing that I have on this slide here is allowing for flexibility in your marketing, not only budget, but plan. If we look at COVID specifically, and knock on wood, ideally we don't have another global pandemic, but the same thought logic I think exists here, which is things we can't account for happening that really should shift our strategy and making sure you have the room to accommodate that. For example, again, looking at COVID specifically here, we had at the beginning of when COVID hit, people weren't out, they weren't shopping. There's a ton of uncertainty around how we act as like a society, what, how brands were going to act and respond. So there was really a downtick in shopping from customers, and therefore marketing dollars that were being spent and utilized. But fast forward a couple months, and as we start to understand what this looks like for us, as brands start to understand what it looks like for them, there was an increase and a surge in e-commerce shopping. And because of that, we saw marketing budgets having to really spike up to be able to accommodate it. Not only to be able to accommodate it, but to gain a little bit more market share, because not all brands were able to put forth more marketing dollars. So really allowing to have kind of a safeguard that you can tap into, whether it's plan specific or budget specific, will be really important. And I think it's kind of a large takeaway that we learned in these coming months. Awesome. E-commerce diversification. So again, majority of shopping is starting online. The trends are showing us that this will continue. People will continue to be shopping online. So, and knowing that customers are shopping around, right? It's important to be represented on multiple e-com platforms, the same way you think about diversifying your brick and mortar presence. I think it's easy to think about Amazon as being number one, because it obviously is, but like we've talked about earlier, not only the trends, but the data and some of the releases like Walmart Plus, for example, are showing us that there's really some, new headway to be made by some of these additional marketplaces. Everything we've seen from our experience going on 13 years here working on Amazon, the early adopters of Amazon are set up for success incredibly well right now. We see high velocity going through those listings, high reviews, more access to beta and different marketing strategies. So the same could be thought about for these additional marketplaces. Starting here, looking at international expansion. So Amazon Global. Amazon has always had programs that allow brands to sell their products in other marketplaces fairly easily, but they continue to roll out some different programs that allow brands to do that. So NARF, or North American Fulfillment Network, is a newer one, as well as like global ASINs, both which really allow you to be represented on multiple marketplaces really at the click of a button. There's obviously some things that should be considered, like any other regulations or VAT or taxes, but really it's a huge opportunity for brands to really simply test the waters of those different marketplaces. Looking specifically at marketplace expansion, we've got Walmart, we've got eBay, we've got Google, there's a lot of other smaller ones as well. Our thought here would be really diversifying where your products are at for a few different reasons. We look at COVID specifically here, we saw a lot of issues with being able to fulfill inventory. Some of those obviously came from the root of things, which is manufacturing, but also Amazon, for the safety of their customers, for the safety of their workers, had to put some different strategies in place, which really kind of stifled the ability for brands to get inventory in. And when that happened with the spike of e-commerce trend, we saw a lot of brands missing out on lost revenue. So had they had their products in additional marketplaces, would have been set up for success a little bit differently. But additionally, we talked about early adopters, Walmart Plus, Carrie mentioned, Google. So Google Shopping ads, she talked about the $1,000 they were investing back to brands, but even more than that, Google's been a little bit kind of mute on the shopping side for a couple of years, but really the surge in showing they're investing both monetary and time, I think is pretty indicative of what's to come there. So not only from like a brand control and consistency piece should you expand marketplaces, but also just from a security piece. And then product diversification per marketplace. So I think this is pretty specific to if you are not a brand who already controls their brand and their product presence in multiple marketplaces. So maybe you have a few authorized sellers or unauthorized sellers, whatever the case may be. It's really not uncommon to have pricing wars across marketplaces. So the same product listed on Amazon as is on Walmart for a couple dollars difference, so that sellers can really try to gain most of the market share for that product. A strategy here could be diversifying your product across marketplaces so that those pricing wars don't have to come into effect. If you have a little bit more control, you are the main seller in those marketplaces, less of an issue here, but something that should definitely be considered. All right, so from an inventory and distribution piece, I think this is, well, I know that this is huge. And again, we talked briefly here about some of the implications we saw around COVID, but with continued increase in online shopping, it's pretty imperative that brands have a good handle on inventory and distribution. So consistent fulfillment method. There's a lot of different ways you can fulfill products, especially on some of the larger marketplaces like Walmart and Amazon. For example, you can drop ship, so direct to customer. You can utilize fulfillment by Amazon, which is their warehousing network. Whatever the case may be, understanding where you have the highest margin and where you have the highest return, and then sort of sticking to that where you can, is really helpful. A couple examples here: Prime, which allows a fast shipping. We see upwards of 30% spike in sales from brands who sell on Prime versus direct to consumer through dropship. But Prime also places you higher in Amazon's algorithm, and I think the same could be assumed as we start to jump into this Walmart Plus subscription side as well. So the ability to increase your overall visibility here, but also just consistency. If you have a consistent fulfillment method and if you're using FBA, Amazon will give you what is called an IPI, or an inventory performance index. By the ability to consistently move through your inventory and fulfill your inventory, you're putting yourself in a better place here. Amazon recently made changes to that, which we'll talk to in a second. Demand forecasting. So I think about this specifically if you're choosing to branch out to new marketplaces, which again is a strategy we would recommend given recent events. Demand forecasting, so understanding new marketplaces, and especially as these new marketplaces themselves ramp up, what can you expect and what inventory should you be able to have on hand so that you can consistently fulfill to your customers. And then similarly, streamline process and timeline for manufacturing and shipping. Do you have the ability to forecast months out in advance, especially as we look at holiday, Q4, Prime Day? And does your ability to forecast out months in advance take into account seasonality or other spikes in the marketplaces? If not, that's really something that should be considered. Working to understand the change, if any, in your manufacturing and shipping time. So your lead time to be able to get the product in is, I think, a huge gap that we see in a lot of brands who are just starting to sell themselves on marketplace, and we see them run out of inventory quite frequently until they can get a good handle on that. I think very similarly here, so forecast tools for both seasonality and other promotional spikes. If you don't have any year-over-year data to understand what you can expect and be able to forecast in the bumps in e-commerce that we're seeing overall, it can lead you to having a lack of inventory or run out of stock, which this one's obvious, lost revenue, right? So if you don't have inventory, you can't fulfill it to customers and you can't receive revenue on that. But I think even some larger and lasting impacts are lost customers. So the goal is to build brand loyalty, and if a brand can't buy your product and they have to choose a different or like product, it's not unlikely that those customers have a new brand that they're looking at. So I think that's a pretty lasting effect of this. Stunted marketing growth. So if we think about Amazon specifically, Amazon marketing for some of the more lucrative parts of their marketing only run when that seller who's running the marketing, so yourself in this instance, is in that buy box, so owning that sales space. If you are running out of stock, you are effectively pausing or turning off your marketing campaigns, which just bumps you down lower in Amazon's relevancy game. So each time you run out of stock, you're having to work a little bit harder and therefore pay a little bit more money to get back up to a spot where you once were, which we know we can't afford to not be marketing at this point. And then poor seller performance on Amazon here. So if, again, there's some IPI score implications here, but also if you're constantly running out of stock or you're overselling and Amazon has to cancel orders, your performance as a seller goes down, which impacts your overall reach. Perfect. So moving into considerations here, Carrie, did you want to go ahead and jump into some things that you should be aware of as you're looking to adjust or change strategy?
Absolutely, yeah. So these are just some of the common things that we see or we know to be not issues, but I think tactical pieces of a brand strategy in order to be really successful in the long term, especially given all the unknowns and all the changes. So kind of looking at our history as a company, we've been in the space for 12 years, and at one time, believe it or not, we did everything very manually. And just given the nature and the sheer size of these marketplaces, it's not an effective strategy to do really anything manually, or I guess I should say, another way of putting that, the less you can do manually, the more that you can rely on solutions that include AI or have actual back data supporting kind of their logic, the more successful you're going to be, especially as the marketplaces continue to become more saturated with competing products. So one of the most compelling advantages that we see brands utilizing is really software solutions, and these come in a variety of forms that many brands aren't really fully aware of, kind of how robust the different offerings are and how you can really kind of tap into different solutions for different aspects of the business. So kind of taking a look at all of those different things, in order to really maximize profits and revenue potential, which we know is always a really relevant piece of the strategy, but particularly in uncertain economic times like right now. This is something that we really advise brands, and as a retailer ourselves, something that we obviously rely on very heavily. But there are software solutions out there, and actually e-tailz has one of our own proprietary software solutions called Channel Auditor. And the main goal here is cost recovery for brands. And this is for inventory that has been mismanaged by Amazon or returns that weren't recouped back to the brand. And so just looking at what we've been able to recoup in through this software, we've been able to recoup over $4 million. I think it's about 4.5 now in dollars that otherwise wouldn't have been refunded to e-tailz. So essentially the software will automatically identify cases in which Amazon owes you money, and then the software enables you to quickly file those so that you're recouping every dollar to your bottom line possible. So that's really effective. Just otherwise, like I said, it's very difficult to track this manually, and I think nearly impossible as you continue to grow. There's going to be dollars that you're missing out on that can help your sustainability. And then on the other side of that, marketing automation. So this is something that's become more and more sophisticated over time across marketplaces, but specifically on Amazon as they've really invested a lot more into their CPC campaigns, so sponsored products, sponsored brands, etc. And so we were also doing all of the advertising manually at one point. And over the last 5 years or so, we've been using an internal software that we actually just released as a SaaS product earlier this year called Ad Manager. And essentially, it enables brands and us as a retailer to basically automatically, leveraging AI technology, automatically run optimizations based on brands' goals or specific KPIs. So things like out of budget, where you may have a set campaign, but as velocity increases through the day, or you have new competitors kind of coming in now or increasing their budget, you're basically throttling your ad campaigns on and off. And so Ad Manager, one of the features within it, enables you to, as an advertiser, to set certain KPIs around or certain goals around your KPIs so that budget never runs out. So you're essentially never losing momentum with your advertising strategy, and you're always competing against new entrants to market or new unexpected thresholds in velocity. So those are kind of two pieces for specifically the profit and revenue side. But there are other pieces that can really set brands up for long-term success from a control perspective. So brand control and insights. An example of that would be Parasect, which is also software that we sell, but there are others out there on the market. And essentially that gives brands insights to who's selling your product, so which retailers are representing your product online and where are they pricing it at. Kelsey touched on some of the issues that ineffective pricing strategies can cause in the long run, and it can really disrupt overall retail strategies if you're not being really consistent and very proactive in how your product is being priced. It can cause really diminished relationships with other retailers, and so just something to be very proactive about when you're selling on e-commerce. And then fulfillment and shipping logistics. Something we almost joke about internally is never buy too much, but always enough. It's kind of this perfect balance that it seems almost unachievable. Something that we've really tried to perfect over the last decade, but essentially, you never want to run out of stock, because then you're missing out on consumers who might be looking for your product, and that negatively impacts your placement on Amazon. But you never want to buy too much, because then you could be exposed to long-term storage fees, which can be very, very expensive and can really hurt your bottom line. So we leverage software to do that, and intelligence that kind of removes the human element, and then we layer on top of that the human element to make sure that nothing is missed and we're really optimizing the buying strategy. And then dropship integration, automation. This is something that is often overlooked by brands. And I think, especially given the times we're in and the uncertainty that we've seen and experienced through COVID-19 and some of the changes that have been made by Amazon. For instance, Amazon restricted all non-essential products for a time during COVID-19. And so basically, if you ran out of inventory in their warehouse and you were kind of in the midst of that time frame, you didn't have a product live on Amazon unless you had a different way to get the product to the end consumer. So drop shipping can be a great kind of alternative, or if you run out of stock using Amazon's FBA, this can be a great way to make sure that your listings are always live and you have a product offering available for shopping consumers. And then jumping into the next slide, it's really kind of the flip side of it, focusing on working with a partner who has the expertise to be able to successfully manage and drive your e-commerce strategy, or investing in the resources internally. Doesn't honestly really matter how you get there. Just making sure that that's a part of your strategy. It's a very important part of your strategy. You really need a team of people who have eyes on all aspects of your e-commerce strategy, just because there's so many moving pieces, like we've mentioned. And it takes really a village of people, a big team of people to really effectively drive results and to ensure that you're not falling behind with competitors or the changes that the marketplaces are making, and capitalizing on all the new opportunities. In addition, looking at marketing very holistically, I think, is very important, and sometimes also kind of an oversight from brands. So Amazon, most people are aware, has a lot of promotional opportunities, and they have the CPC opportunities within their platform, which I mentioned. But we've seen a lot of success, and Kelsey kind of touched on this, but we're leveraging solutions like influencer marketing or social media marketing, including paid social ads, to drive traffic back to marketplaces. And this kind of ties into a question which we'll get into in the Q&A, but that came through during the webinar about really making sure that your product is competitive. And I think one of the key factors that is kind of part of Amazon's secret sauce, but really the product placement and discoverability and visibility within Amazon is really tied to sales velocity over time. So the more traffic you're driving to your product listing, the more awareness you're driving from consumers off marketplace to marketplace, the faster you're going to expedite those sales coming through, and the more Amazon is going to reward your placement. So you'll get better organic placement because of all of the heightened sales coming through. So those are really effective strategies to do that. Digital marketing, which is broad, but includes all of the CPC and other opportunities that we've had a lot of success with. I think the CPC campaigns on Amazon are very effective, just given the shopping nature of the marketplace. The conversion rates that we see on Amazon are much higher than what we would see on Google, just because consumers are going to the marketplace with a buying intent in mind, as opposed to Google. They're more likely to be browsing or researching just kind of early on in their shopping exploration. And then SEO, making sure that all of the relevant keywords are included in your product listing, and consumers can actually find what you're looking through organically because of those keywords, but also when they get to your product listing, making sure that the photos are well representing your product. You have lifestyle photos, you have studio images, so that consumers can kind of envision themselves interacting with that product, but also have the detailed information that they would need in order to make an informed decision and to limit returns. Grassroots efforts, there's a lot of different ways to build your brand outside of marketplace, which will help compete against all of the knockoff products that come up, or the products that are clearly just trying to undercut and undervalue your brand and try to kind of win in the Amazon game. But the more you can build your brand up off Amazon, the more you're going to kind of counter that in the long run. And then marketplace promotion. So coupons and deals and Amazon Live, those are more what I would consider to be more kind of under the grassroots umbrella. But Amazon Live, for instance, is a great way to connect directly with your consumers. And with there being pretty few ways to kind of have that personal connection with consumers on Amazon, it's important to leverage all of those so that you're building as much of a kind of human element within your brand as possible. And then I think, Kelsey, I'll turn it over to you to talk about some more of the brand control.
Yep. So speaking specifically here to some things that you should be aware of in an effort to maintain brand control as you shift to more of an e-commerce focus here. So a selling method dictates pricing and in some cases margin control. So what I mean by that is there's a lot of different ways that your products can be visible on marketplaces, whether you choose to set up your own seller account in respective marketplaces and sell, or you sell directly to a trusted third party, or maybe even directly to Amazon retail in some cases. There are some constraints that you'll have around adjusting pricing. So thinking about specifically seasonality or adjusting for off Amazon promotions and then buy box eligibility. Couple examples here. If you sell yourself, so if you are taking your products directly from manufacturing to selling on marketplaces, you eliminate the middleman there, which is that wholesale cost. So theoretically improving your margin. With that, you'll also want to put out some dollars for marketing and whatnot, but you now have control of your pricing in full. So if you want to adjust pricing for seasonality, or maybe you're running out of stock on some top SKUs and it makes sense to adjust your pricing to help slow or maintain the velocity there. Those are options that you have versus if you sell to third party or directly to Amazon retail. Even if your partnership is super trusted there's still the likelihood that pricing can be manipulated there to eliminate overstock or eliminate any storage fees that the seller themselves are seeing. Amazon specifically, they're always looking for the best price. So you lose quite a bit of control there, specifically around pricing, which is a key driver to your guys' success. It's also a huge impact for the buy box eligibility. So if we think about Amazon specifically, and we'll talk about them just because they are the largest marketplace, but if you have a product that is sold cheaper elsewhere compared to Amazon, Amazon takes a little bit of offense to it, and they work to do what we refer to as roll up the buy box. So if they don't feel like the customer can get the best price on their website and they have to go elsewhere, they kind of do this false little punishment piece where they'll roll up the buy box. It reads almost as if the product is out of stock, so it can really deter your customer from purchasing, having you see lost revenue. And if you don't have that control in those additional marketplaces to really see consistent pricing across different marketplaces, this can be a huge issue. Seller consistency, something similar here. So Amazon announced just about a week ago that they are going to disclose seller information come September 1st. So that's huge. And that's kind of a first move that we've seen Amazon make and really allowing brands to have more control on Amazon. Amazon is an open marketplace. So you and I, we could create a seller account for anything that we have in our house and just list it up there. And historically, we haven't been required to disclose exactly where it's coming from, anywhere from a phone number to email to seller address. Come September 1st, that will change. So really giving yourselves, the brands, more control in selling your products online and giving you a further and escalated effort where you can maintain control with a little bit less work. And like Carrie mentioned, there are some tools that can help aid that, Perispec being one of them, that can really consolidate this information for you. And this is really helpful too in eliminating potential counterfeit or incorrect product in your listings. The other consideration here is making sure you have a strong understanding of your brick and mortar presence and of who you're allowing to sell online. With brick and mortars being either temporarily or permanently closed at this point, it's not unlikely that they're looking to sell and move some of this inventory online. One, because that's where shoppers are shopping, but also because they have cash tied up in this inventory. So ensuring that you're having those conversations with your brick and mortars if they've existed, or just being aware that with the surge in e-commerce, whether you're an established seller prior or not, it's not uncommon for people to kind of look to get into the gig. So looking to find inventory wherever they can, whether people are clearing it out from brick and mortar and then just turning around and reselling it online. So I think a huge consideration here is being aware of what could come with some potential rogue or authorized sellers that you didn't necessarily account for being on marketplaces until now. And then here again, a little bit redundant to what I just said, but just making sure that you are aware that there's more people looking to kind of get some of the gains that are coming with e-commerce as people are shifting and spending more dollars here. So stock consideration. So we talked in the strategy part around the importance of having adequate stock and maintaining inventory levels. But just yesterday, Amazon announced even further inventory limits, but now at an ASIN level. So this is something we've been anticipating. It came a little bit faster than we thought, but essentially what this is saying is come August, Amazon will be looking at a per ASIN level, limiting the amount of inventory that you can send into an Amazon warehouse. I think partially in response to COVID, but also partially in response to the fact that there's going to be a significant amount of new inventory coming into Amazon warehouses that they want to make sure they have room for. So you can review this by looking at your stock reports. It will essentially tell you per SKU what you're allowed to send in, but this is huge, and making sure that you have a really clean distribution line and making sure you have a really tight ability to forecast and send in inventory with minimal lead times will be really important here. As we look at this taking effect in August, if you can only have a certain amount of product, that's really going to impact your availability and product availability for Prime Day, should that actually fall in October, as well as Q4. And Amazon is saying right now that they're going to, per ASIN, try to allow for, quote unquote, 3 months worth of coverage at an ASIN level, which is great, but that doesn't do a very good job of accounting for some of the spikes that we will no doubtedly see, especially if we see Prime Day, especially as Q4 ramps up and as sellers start to further turn to e-commerce shopping. Perfect. So just a few other considerations. I'll breeze through this a little bit so we have time for Q&A. We're happy to talk about these things further, but other considerations as you look to further shift your strategy or look at more of a full e-commerce strategy, tax and products compliance. So if this isn't something you're familiar with, absolutely take the time to understand what this looks like. For example, if you're new to selling on e-commerce, specifically Amazon, you're now responsible for filing taxes, as well as product compliance. Each marketplace and each product category will have different little nuances where, Amazon or Walmart, for example, will have you follow certain guidelines. If you're not following those guidelines, not uncommon for you to get away with it for a while, but can have longer lasting implications like listing or account shutdowns. Pricing and promotion strategy. So again, I think just speaking back to the consistency here, making sure if you're running a promo on one site, it's known or recognized, and the potential implications of a buy box rolled or lost revenue on a particular site is known. Product competition. I think this is something that we can't totally predict in terms of category or which products, but there will no doubt be new products that are coming to e-commerce, just like we're urging you guys right now to get brands visible on marketplaces. So understanding what new and heightened product competition means for how you're thinking about and how you're speaking to your brand, but also how you're marketing up against your brand. The importance of being nimble and yeah.
Oh, sorry to interrupt. We have some really good questions, and I just want to make sure that we have a few minutes to get to those. So
yep,
I think we can just jump right into those if that's okay. The first one was you mentioned that that consumer acquisition is potentially cheaper on Amazon despite their extensive product catalog than pushing consumers to one's website. I'm not sure if this is the case, as Amazon's algorithm pushes the consumer to the cheapest product, even if it's copy or counterfeit. How do you circumvent that to win the sale once you have done EBC and storefront? So great question, super relevant question, I think, and I tried to touch on this a little bit through some of the slides that I covered, but I think one thing to know is Amazon, I mentioned this, but Amazon's algorithm is heavily weighed on sales velocity over time. So it's less to do about price. If the price is of a different product, that's maybe kind of a knockoff product or popping up in just purely cheaper than your product. It really comes down to if that product is pushing more sales over the same period of time than yours is. And so that's something to consider. Obviously, consumers are going to be more open to buying a product that's cheaper, but if that product has bad reviews or has bad content, that may not be the case. So it's just something to consider. Another piece of this is we touched on Amazon has invested a lot more in giving brands a lot more authority over their brands. So through brand registered, brands are able to file things like trademark infringement. So if it truly is like a knockoff and they're copying any part of your IP, that's kind of a lever that brands have to pull to really protect their brands. And then the other big piece of this is making sure to build your brand off of Amazon. So a lot of these products that pop in and are less expensive and probably not as adequate as your product is, are really just trying to, there's essentially a lot of them are scouring Amazon, seeing what's selling well, and then they're making a copycat product that's cheaper. They, in the long run, won't be able to compete if you have a very established brand off of Amazon and you're doing, if you're investing in, your social media and some of these other things that we touched on to build that brand presence and to draw consumers in off of Amazon, because then you're not just relying on the Amazon traffic, you're building your own presence that will essentially suit your brand long-term in other ways. So just a few things to touch on for that one. I think it's a great question that we get a lot. Another one was, would you consider that the same consumer will shop on Walmart and Amazon, or setting up shop on both will touch a wider demographic. Traditionally, Walmart is more of a price sensitive than brand conscious. Kels, do you want to touch on that? Because I think you've mentioned some of this in your slides.
Yeah, so I think the answer is both yes and no. Will there be a different demographic? I think a few months ago we would have said yes, there's generally a different demographic for Walmart based on how Walmart has traditionally marketed themselves, and they're trying to branch out from that. And we can see that with the way that they're introducing Walmart Plus, for example. But I would say more recently, there's definitely some crossover here. Especially as we run out of stock on the larger marketplaces, like maybe your direct website or Amazon, having goods on both allows for that crossover. And again, a good majority, 75% of people are shopping around as it comes to price and review. So I think there's still a lot to be learned about how Walmart will continue to own some of this e-commerce space. But I think generally we're seeing crossover, which means we're starting to get people trust in Walmart more. But I would also still assume that we're seeing a large amount of a new demographic. But I think to answer this question, one more thing I'll say is that it's, from our perspective, it's imperative that you are representing yourself on multiple marketplaces and representing yourself well, because if you're not, somebody else will. Somebody else will be getting your product, or brick and mortars will be launching products on e-commerce to kind of fill the gap that exists, just given the large shift. So if expanding to additional marketplaces like Walmart hasn't been part of your strategy because of some of the preconceived notions around Walmart, I'd love to chat with you a little bit further and talk about how I think that this is sort of a good move now, especially as we see some of the successes the early adopters on other marketplaces have had. And then lastly, there's one more question in here that I can touch on. The question is, I've had several distributors selling my products on Amazon for over 8 years now, including e-tailz in the past. The problem that I've seen is that I get many complaints that consumer is not receiving my products, but they're receiving instead inferior items from a fraudulent company. I need this to end and get my products into the hands of the consumer. Can you help with this? So the short answer is yes. There's a lot of different strategies that you can take on Amazon to help combat this. Again, Amazon is an open market, so it's unfortunately going to be a little bit of a game of whack-a-mole. I think a couple of things that we've seen that show Amazon really is making strides in this direction is, one, they're starting to introduce the seller name here, the seller information beyond just the seller name. So giving you a little bit more information about who is actually selling your product. If the issue that you're seeing is more of coming from Amazon fulfillment networks, there's still a lot of different routes that we can take. We can look at non-commingling your products if you haven't already, which really allows each of your sellers to be selling from a specific bucket, and we can kind of trace back where those products are coming from. There's also a couple different ways that we can reach out to Amazon and have them do what's referred to as bin checks, checking the product and looking for accuracy. We can even go so far as removing product to verify manually. And again, Paraspect, our software that we use internally and that a lot of other brands use, can kind of help consolidate a lot of this information and data. Beyond that, there's a few more egregious steps that we can take so much as like labeling each individual product before it leaves your warehouse. So all a very verbose way of saying, yes, we can absolutely help with that. There's a lot of different strategies depending on exactly what you're seeing, which I'd love to chat with you about further as well. And I think that was it, unless there's any other last minute questions that people wanted to sneak in there. A couple questions that we got that we answered individually, but we'll just make sure everyone here is aware. This webinar is being recorded. We'll send that around to all the attendees as well as the deck itself. So you'll have that to lean back on, which will be helpful. And then hopefully goes without saying, e-tailz, we're always here to answer additional questions. So please reach out to us directly. You can hit us up on our website. We have a lot of good content there as well, but happy to continue these conversations even further.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you guys.